Welcome to the Patriot Perspective. My name is Gregory Lykov, and I'm currently joined here with Ofer Adar.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to September 17th iteration of the Patriot Perspective. Today, we have a jam packed episode for you guys. We're going to go through a whole host of events. We're looking at the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates. We'll look at the UN reports accusing Israel of committing a genocide in Gaza. We'll look at updates from the Charlie Kirk assassination investigation. So, a lot to get into today. We'll let you start off with the first story, Greg.
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to begin by speaking about the federal interest rates. So it's been a conversation for months about Donald Trump wanting the Fed to finally cut the interest rates to help people buy a home, help people get a mortgage, and generally get our economy back on track. We see that there was a small cut here of about 0.25%. But Ofer, what are your initial reactions of it? Is this a good move? Is this a little bit too early? Did it come too late? What are we trying to see here?
Yeah, there's so many differing opinions. Many people for months have been badgering Powell about lowering it beforehand. So throughout the August and July sessions, whenever the Federal Open Market Committee would convene, they never decided to cut the interest rates. And even now, it's 0.25. It's not anymore. Many people on Trump's team were pressuring the Federal Reserve to cut it by zero point 0.5 or even more potentially. But after the reports about the jobs markets, especially in September and in August, the job market reports were rather poor. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, now with new administration, they've been forced to revise their numbers from 2024 and from 2025 because they've been grossly overestimating the amount of people that are getting hired. And with those numbers being decreased, it shows that there is a massive buildup now in, or rather, a lack of employment compared to what we had previously imagined. And so now what people need is plain cash. Companies need cash in order to employ people, to hire them, to open up new offerings. Currently have more job offerings open in the markets than people that are looking for a job. And that's not because we don't have people in this country that could potentially do it, but they're not interested in doing so. And at the same time, the companies themselves, they don't have the wherewithal to provide those potential employees, whether they are defined as unemployed under the U3 metric or the U6 metric, or whether they're not even in the labor participation force accounting at all. So that can change if the base salary, if some of the benefits are raised, and that's going to happen as a consequence of the interest rates going down. Is going to benefit everybody, as like you said, with mortgages, with credit card payments, with car loans, everything. And yes, it's a part of the reason why is because the Trump administration has done a good job during 2025 in reducing inflation. Inflation was at around 2.9% in August, and it was at 2.7%, I believe, in July. So there's been a very slight uptick, and that's why the Federal Reserve is being cautious right now and not lowering it by any more. But it's getting very close to the 2% targets. And as a result, now the onus is on the Federal Reserve to begin kickstarting the economy and allowing a stream of money to get in order to allow for growth now, because there's a big fear of maybe not a recession, but of stagnation. Because during the Biden administration, we all know there was massive growth, behind inflation going along with it. Now we're seeing the inflation weakening, and perhaps now the solution is to allow for additional growth to ensure that we don't see stagnation. So, what do you think about the decision? Do you think that it was too little, too late? Are you happy about the state of the economy now, Greg?
Yeah, of course. So I want to start off by mentioning your point about hiring. So, especially with all of the deportations under the second Trump
Yeah.
administration, hiring and replacing the jobs of illegal immigrants that people claim a lot of Americans don't actually want to fill, that was a conversation for quite some time. And especially now, when we're seeing the interest rates be cut and a shortage of people who want to work, not a shortage of people, but of people who want to work, when we're seeing that, it means that there's an issue of our country. It means that people could either A, have too much money or are too comfortable. That's why we have seen the Trump administration take action against this. We have seen him being more strict with social security programs, where he set a work requirement to make sure people aren't living on these programs. You see, and just a few days ago, I was actually on an interview in a podcast where the host brought up social Social Security in the conversation about socialism. They asked if I believe that Social Security is a form of socialism. And to be honest, yes, how it is used right now, Social Security is a socialist program. How it is intended to be used, though, it is not a socialist program at all, because the whole entire point of Social Security is to be a temporary step up for people on it. However, now we have a culture of people staying on Social Security. That leads them to not have a job because they don't need one, they have enough money. They will not go up in society, their kids will stay on Social Security, and it will be a chain of events that will lead to a widespread failure. And that is the concern. So we should be addressing that. Now, look, specifically relating to the cut in the interest rates, I think that everyone was expecting this to happen. It has been months before the Fed finally cut the interest rate, so it has passed enough time. Donald Trump has been pressuring um, the Fed to do this. So overall, this is a good move. However, we do have to understand that our economy is still not fully stable. We still don't know the full impact of the tariffs, even though now it's looking very good. There's only positive impacts. We still don't know how people are going to react when the big, beautiful bills work requirement comes into action. And we also don't know how people are going to react with the tax cuts. So, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and regarding Social Security, it's a very important point. The culture of reliance on Social Security, once an individual reaches, say, the age of 62, and then that's the earliest you can get onto it, or up until 67, most do it around 65. There's an issue that, especially recently, people have not been saving up because they are banking on the fact that they will receive Social Security payments once they reach retirement age, or they have some sort of agreement via pension with their employers. And the problem is, if people aren't thinking 2, 3 steps ahead up until their retirement, I'm a big proponent of investing at a young age. Then, if the entire program goes broke, then a lot of people are just going to be left without anything. That's a huge concern. Social
Yeah.
Security has $150 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Now, the thing is, a lot of the people that are owed this money by the United States government are already dead. So that's not accounted for in the number. But still, there are trillions of dollars worth of unfunded liabilities in addition to the national debt, which is continuing to explode. And we're looking now in every single Western society, including now the United States with the deportations, that the age or the population size of the youth is decreasing, meaning there are going to be less people in the tax pool to pay payroll tax that goes into funding Social Security. So we're getting a ballooning older population in a smaller young population, meaning that there's going to be less income revenue for Social Security. And then all those people that were banking on it this entire time, they may not be able to receive it unless we increase taxes on people that are currently working. And that's why, again, we need to try to reduce the reliance on those federal programs. They're very important, obviously, as they were created during the Great Depression for a very noble cause. But yeah, there is a big problem with it being a house of cards that can potentially cause issues down the line. So yeah, that's just one aspect of all of this. I wonder what you think about not just Social Security, but I suppose the entire Trump policy
Yeah.
in relation to economics, like perhaps the inflation angle, because that's a big talking point for Trump, saying that, yeah, inflation's been going down pretty much since he's come in. And now is a good time to lower the interest rates in order to allow for more GDP growth.
Yeah, definitely. So, first off, I want to make sure that our viewers understand this is not an issue with only Social Security. It's an issue with Medicaid, Medicare, and other handouts, SNAP, and all of these programs are made to, again, uplift people, but they don't do that. They instead have people staying on the programs. That is the concern. And you bring up the ballooning older population. We have a birth rate in this country that is the lowest in history right now. It's about 1.6 births per woman, I guess, and it is by far the lowest. It's highly concerning because when we see our birth rate only decreasing at a rate where it's already wasn't that high, 10, 15 years ago, it begs the question, how are we going to treat the older generation? How are we going to pay for them? we're not going to be able to afford it. The very basic of a strong society, of a strong country, is to have a strong birth rate. And without that, we will fail. And that's unfortunately what it is looking like today. But to answer your question about the Trump administration's impact on the economy, I mean, overall, the tariffs were a great success. And if you disagree with that, I would ask why, because so far we haven't seen any negative effects of the tariffs that every economist predicted. We have only seen positive effects. We have seen a foreign direct investment of over $5 trillion in the next 4 years. We have seen that manufacturers are finally building back into the United States. Manufacturers are investing into the United States. So there's no bad aspect of these tariffs. In general, Trump's economy is surprisingly functioning at a rate that I didn't expect before. I expected the tariffs to at least affect our economy, but really they only affected it, you know, they they were good. They were beneficial. We haven't seen any horrible effects, and that just goes to show that what Trump says he actually means, and when he actually implements it, it will be done and it will be done correctly. So overall, Trump's stance in the economy was wonderful. I mean, truly, in the last year, he has probably made more of an impact in the economy than any other president in the last 5 decades. And I say that, with other presidents who have made a bigger impact, negatively than they have positively. So it's really impressive. But Ofer, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so to begin with tariffs, you listed out a pretty comprehensive list of the benefits. Manufacturing jobs are coming back. There are deals and a lot of foreign direct investment coming from South Korea, Japan, Gulf states. All of that is already being done. And there was recently progress on the trade deal with China. So again, tariffs are being used as the lever of pressure against all those countries in those negotiations that will be used to help improve American industries. That's one benefit. Now, a problem is a lot of people are looking at the poor jobs reports and trying to claim that it's as a result of the tariffs, as a result of Trump's poor mismanagement of the economy. The problem is that's accounting for the fact that people are also getting deported and are self-deporting. We have between 1 million to 1.5 million people that have self-deported, that have left on their own because they're scared of ICE getting to them first. And so, of course, in the process, they're leaving their jobs. But when you look at native-born Americans and their employment rates, they've actually gone up since Trump's been in office. And then you have to average that, of course, with the illegal immigrants and the other people that were here on visas and such that left. So that's a part of the calculation as well. And now that means that there's going to be more job openings, especially with manufacturing jobs coming in. And yes, that means that now perhaps there's going to be an opportunity for higher employment rates, higher labor participation rates. That is all positive. It's things that people have been yearning for 30 years, ever since NAFTA was signed, ever since Obama signed the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And now a lot of that is beginning to manifest under Trump's helm. And the problem is, and this is something that Biden did, and it's very smart in the short term. He let in those 20 million plus illegal immigrants in order to flood the job markets and very quickly correct the economy after COVID, in order to very, very quickly bring back GDP up, meaning that there would be more investment, more government spending, and that would cover everybody's welfare benefits, that people would get these one-time $1,000 checks. That was all good in the short term. But now, as Biden sort of left office and we started to see the effects of the supply chains, the effects of inflation that dragged on for 3 to 4 years, and now Trump's actually deporting people. So now the job market is getting constricted as a whole, not for the natives, but as a whole, because we're looking at jobs in the United States. That's obviously going to lead to byproducts. So that sort of shock therapy that Trump's done, both with immigration and with tariffs, is a part of why we've seen a slowdown in growth. It's part of why the job markets appears, at least on service level, to be not increasing at the rate that people want. And it's also why inflation is a bit sort of sticking right now at like high 2% rather
Yeah.
than reaching 2% as well. But 2026 is going to be a very good year. I'm sure of that, because all the trends, they're going to point in that direction once the economy adjusts for all of the sort of artificial injections that Biden made. Once that wears off and Trump's effects come in, there's going to be a lot of positive developments, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up the 2026 fiscal year, and we see that that's when the tax effects will come in. So we'll see if the big beautiful bill was actually as good as we believe right now, which I'm sure it will be. But to also add on, there has been a lot of other effects with the tariffs, militarily speaking. Look at the EU right now. The EU signed probably the greatest deal in history of America with agreeing to militarize. And not only that, but they gave a generous offer to the United States. I don't know, you're very well versed in it, so I wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah, look, they agreed on a very long list of things that previously they were very hesitant to agree to, not with Biden, not with first Trump administration. It appears as if Trump coming in and saying that I'm no longer going to subsidize Ukraine, I'm going to try to reach a resolution, that really jettisoned them, and it served as shock therapy as well. They realized that there were going to be consequences for inaction, so they immediately mobilized and started to offer Trump concessions, including hundreds of billions of dollars in military purchases from the United States over the next 4 years. So they're going to purchase equipment for their own air defense systems, for their own air force, for their own artillery pieces. They need 155 millimeter rounds, 122 millimeter rounds, whatever it may be, for mortars, for howitzers, for self-propelled guns, all of that. And that's needed for deterring Russia. It's needed also in order to send some of the excess surplus to Ukraine, because the European interest is in ensuring that Ukraine remains a substantial buffer zone in between the eastern border of Europe and then Russia's western border. And that's all being done due to Trump's pressure on them. And so, from a military perspective, like you were saying, it's extremely positive. It also means that now the Department of Defense, they're going to need to start really ramping up production. They've committed to a lot of new projects, including some new cheaper drones that are sort of mimicking Russian drones that were produced over the past 3 years. Also, a couple of cruise missiles that are a bit cheaper. They're called ERAMs. And so they pledged to send about 2,300 of them to Ukraine. That's going to take a year or two until it gets into effect. But all of those standardization measures in order to ensure that the military is mass producing, which is it was not doing under Biden, by the way, and it hasn't been doing since the fall of the Soviet Union. So you can't blame
Yeah.
one person for it. But now Trump's changing that. And it's very important, not because we want to go to war, but because we want to show, first of all, that we have strong industry in the United States, which is going to employ hundreds of thousands of people with good paying jobs, but also because it serves as a deterrence factor against Russia and China. So, yes, like you were asking, it's a very important development.
Yeah, definitely. And now, to transition a little bit, the conversation yesterday, many were discussing a report that came out by the UN Independent International Committee. Basically, it's an organization that doesn't speak directly for the UN itself, but it is highly associated with it, and the UN does use them as a primary source, basically. So we have seen that this organization, after investigating for months, has determined that Israel is, according to them, committing genocide. Now, look, when I heard that this report, came out, I was interested. I wanted to read it, and I did. It was about 72 pages, very boring, but I read it, and after reading it, it's shocking because even the report itself is ridiculous. The report itself doesn't even like admit to the proper definition of genocide. But Ofer, we can get into the details of that report in a little bit, but I first want to ask you a few questions about, the situation in Gaza. So the main point is, why are so many civilians being killed? What is the number of civilians being killed? How do we get that number of civilians being killed? And is Israel actually doing anything with the war? So I wanted to ask you those questions because they seem to be very prevalent on both the right and left regarding the situation in Gaza.
Yeah, those are all good questions, so I'll try to keep them organized. So, how do we get that information? For the most part, it's through the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is the Gaza branch of the PA's Ministry of Health. But of course, in Gaza, the PA is run by Hamas. In the West Bank, it's run by the Fatah political party, which is the minority party in the Palestinian Legislative Council. But they, of course, seized power after they lost the 2006 elections. They seized power in the West Bank. Hamas seized power in the Gaza Strip. So the reporting is being done from Hamas political officials or political appointees that Hamas approved of. And so, how are they doing it? They're collecting information through Google Forms in some cases. Literally, they've
Wait,
sent
wait,
out
wait,
on
Ofer,
Telegram and
just
WhatsApp.
to
Yeah,
stop for a second. I just
sure,
have a
sure.
personal question with you. Would
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
trust numbers coming from a terrorist organization?
No, not without any additional corroboration. Like there would have to be something else
So
in
why does the
parallel.
UN trust terrorists?
Well, the UN has their own like independent assessment of the situation, but they can't properly do research and study it while the war is ongoing. So yeah, they're relying on the Ministry of Health. There are a couple of other groups like the International Red Cross. There are groups that, as you were alluding to in our conversations, were associated with the PFLP, so the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That's another armed group that is operating within Gaza. There are a whole slew of them. There's a couple others that I'll mention. There's the World Health Organization. There's World Central Kitchen. There's all the human rights watch groups like Human Rights Watch, like B'Tselem. All of them are involved in collecting data. So that's through interviews with people. It's through their sources that are journalists in Gaza, quote unquote journalists, of course, freelancers that they have over there. But it's never going to be enough to actually ascertain a credible number. So the best numbers are from the hospitals, obviously, because you receive a body and you document it. And that's what the Ministry of Health claims they're doing. And then they also had the Google Forms, which was embarrassing. And so I think they've not publicized them since that happened. That was a very, conspicuous incident. But for the most part, they have these hospitals that they admit the patients into, and then they list out the names on Telegram, for instance. So that's what the Ministry of Health claims they do for their methodology, and then the UN runs with it. They say, and many times, by the way, like with the mainstream media, they don't say it's from the Ministry of Health. They just say it as a fact without adding in that corollary, which is a big journalistic problem.
Yeah. And not only that, if you read the report, they have citations. And like, their citations are the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is like crazy. And, when you're citing UNRWA and the Gaza Ministry of Health, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a laughable report. UNRWA is Hamas. I mean, we had dozens of members, a part of UNRWA, been proven to have ties in Hamas, been proven to actually, participate in the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel. So how are we using them as a source? Not only that, but if we go a little bit further, we can see that the UN itself has, from the very beginning of this conflict, said this situation was a genocide. Before there were however many reports now that there are, we have
Yeah.
seen that the UN has always been criticizing Israel, never been criticizing Hamas. So when I asked the UN if I could speak to them, is the situation that Hamas is doing genocide? Did Hamas on October 7th commit a genocide? And their answer is no, which I find crazy. But Ofer, just to continue, I believe I asked you also of why the UN trusts these numbers, because they're obviously from a terrorist organization, and you don't have to be stupid to understand that a terrorist organization is a little bit more inclined to lie on these reports than, let's say, a democracy. So why are they trusting it? Is it out of bigotry? Is it because they have no other information? What is the answer?
Yeah, it's because they have no other information, and the people that are working on the reports, they are rather biased. You look at some of their employees, like Francesca Albanese. If you know her, she's like very militantly opposed to Israel, and she's made that clear. And it's something that a UN official shouldn't be doing, like going on their social media and every single day, 24/7, criticizing the country. It's unprofessional and it reflects on the organization as well. So, yeah, they do it because they don't have another option. So I can like get it to a certain degree because obviously there needs to be some form of tabulation, but there always should be an asterisk involved, and they should say this is the total amount. Don't say 60,000 people. You should say 60,000 people, militants and civilians, in order to remind people that yes, there's an ongoing war that the IDF has been able to kill per their own information. Which again, if we're going to take Hamas's word, then we should also
Yeah,
take the IDF's word, at least to scrutinize it. So between 23,000 to maybe even 25,000 now militants killed, of whom a majority of them, between 70 to 80% of them, have been identified via like biometric data, via their facial recognition software, meaning that they know the identities of those people. And the problem is, you can't know the identity of every single individual person that was killed. But if they were holding a gun and firing at you, then they're still a combatant, even if the IDF doesn't have like a registry saying their name is this and this. So that would be enough. That would be legitimate under international
Of
law
course.
for those people to be killed. Obviously, in every other war, that's been the case. Only in this particular war, for some reason, Israel has the responsibility to name the names of every single individual person they killed in combat. I've never seen that standard applied to anybody else. It's completely unreasonable. But even under that standard, tens of thousands of people have been named because the IDF, their intelligence apparatus, is so sophisticated. That's why many more civilians have been saved. Many more civilians' lives have been saved because the IDF knows how to differentiate between them. They know where the Hamas militants are operating and where they aren't, and then they strike accordingly with precise munitions.
Yeah, definitely. And now to get into the specifics of the report, I read it and I found it to be hilarious at some point. So, for one, a big part, they go through a list of what constitutes a genocide action wise, not the definition, but action wise. And one of them was the prevention of further life from being born. So it would mean that the IDF took serious action to prevent further life. So number one, if you look at the birth rate in Gaza, the birth rate is still skyrocketing. It's still going up and up and up. Not only that, but the example that they use, and they use one example, I read the report, they use one example for this, is that there was a facility that was an IVF facility, so in vitro fertilization, that apparently got bombed, that was carrying like sperm cells, eggs, or something. Apparently, this facility either got damaged or bombed, and these IVF things are unusable anymore. And apparently, that's their example of preventing life because some random IVF building got bombed. My question to them is that if you were to commit or if you were to decide to, go through the IVF process in the United States, I mean, it's like like thousands of dollars. I mean, how do people in Gaza afford IVF? I'm really curious to know where are they getting the supplies from? I thought they were poor. I thought they were starving. Where are they, you know, uh, committing IVF? I mean, it's a very difficult process. So I found that funny. What are your reactions to that over?
Well, thank you for telling me because I'd never heard of that because it's so ridiculous that it never crossed my feed. But yeah, you think about it. Before the war, the Gazan population received per capita 36 times more than the European civilians received after World War II and the Marshall Plan. So they received an extremely excessive amount of aid through UNRWA for the most part, and from the European Union that funded a lot of these programs. Millions of dollars, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, depending on where you're looking at, especially when you bring in the Qatari money into the Gaza Strip. So money was coming in, and theoretically, if it were allocated proportionally to each individual Gazan, before the war, it was about 2.1 million, 2.2 million people, then they would actually have an opportunity to be rather well off in comparison to their Arab neighbors in Egypt or Jordan or Lebanon, anything like that. But it appears as if there still is a degree of poverty, and that's due to the fact that the funding was obviously staved off for Hamas's purposes to build an arsenal of 20,000 rockets and mortars, to build an arsenal of over 500 kilometers worth of tunnels. That requires a lot of money. It requires money for the excavators, for the concrete, for the workers that are doing all of it, for the weapons. How did they get that money? And the answer is rather obvious, staving off the aid money.
Yeah.
So there's a very good answer for why there still is suffering over there, especially before the war. And now that the war is continuing to drag on, it's even more obvious who's responsible. So just run me through like the rest of like the main points from the reports, because I'm not necessarily familiar with the details, and just explain the ridiculous nature of it, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. So the majority of the report, other than, the few numbers they use from the Gaza Health Ministry and other Hamas affiliated groups, the majority of them stems from individual accounts that they reported from. Now, obviously, the issue with creating a whole report and claiming that there's a genocide on individual accounts is that, number one, the Palestinians are the people who voted for Hamas, they have no motivation to be honest with these people. They have no motivation to say anything good about Israel, so why would they? It's obvious that individual accounts do not account for the total things, because there's no, when there's no holistic view of it, when there's no holistic perspective, then it becomes a very sticky situation. Because let's say in the 2020 election, there were individual accounts of voter fraud, for example. Does that necessarily
Yeah.
mean that the entire election was stolen? No, it doesn't. So we can't,
Mhm.
make a whole report on individual accounts. So that's my first point. But then, obviously, to get more in detail, the report also stated that, houses were purposefully bulldozed, buildings were bulldozed by the IDF officials. And Ofer, can you tell me why the IDF bulldozes houses? Like, what's so special about those houses? I mean, why would they just, bulldoze a poor innocent family's house?
Well, the thing is, Hamas was able to stockpile hundreds of thousands of IEDs. It's so easy to acquire one and then place it literally anywhere. And so you're looking at a battlefield, like let's say there's a certain neighborhood that's largely depleted of, civilians. Hamas has no reason not to put the IEDs in each individual house. It's not that hard. They have the quantity and they have the people that can actually put it there. So each house on the battlefield ends up becoming a potential kill zone for the Israeli soldiers if they step in through the wrong door, through the wrong window. They go up to the second floor, for instance, and then they just stumble upon some closet or something and then it randomly explodes. That's happened to people. That's happened to dozens of soldiers that have been killed over the course of the war, that have been killed by these IEDs. They're placed everywhere. There's no way to know unless there's some sort of drone that flies in and spots beforehand. And so it's a huge risk. And naturally, they're going to try to avert that risk. It's ultimately Hamas's fault for weaponizing every single house and turning it into a legitimate target for the IDF. So they're using excavators to destroy them. And in the process, the mines go off. Also, of course, tunnels are built under these houses. Imagine Gaza, such a small area, like, I don't know, 300, 400 square kilometers of territory. And then you have 500 kilometers worth of tunnels. So where is that going to be? It's going to be under all of those residential areas. When you destroy a tunnel, when you try to dig into a tunnel from the top down, the entire foundation gets destroyed. And then the houses become unlivable. They have to be destroyed one way or another. And you don't want to give Hamas the advantage of using some of these houses, especially the tall buildings, as observation posts
Yeah.
for their forces, spotting the Israeli forces and using them as ambush points. So ultimately, it's because Hamas engages in urban warfare. They use guerrilla tactics, and they can do that. Of course, that's something that they decided to do, but they can't complain about the consequences, which are the destruction of civilian infrastructure, because it's no longer being used by civilians; it's being used for a military purpose.
Yeah, definitely. And to follow up, a lot of questions regarding the aid have been in the report, like the
Yeah.
fact that, according to them, Israel limited the aid. There was not enough aid given, even though there was like 2 million tons of aid given. Doesn't make sense to me. But the question I had for you was that Hamas has been proven to steal aid. And it is Israel's claim that Hamas steals aid for money to sell it back to their people. So why does Hamas need this money? What are they buying? There's no rockets that they could buy and smuggle into Gaza. So what are they using this money for?
It's for the salaries, frankly. Hamas, they are nothing without the activists, without the fighters that continue to hold on to internal security in the positions that they still hold in Gaza. If those people abandon them and there's no internal security, militias are going to pop up and they're going to start rebelling against
Yeah.
Hamas's control. Individual clans will just take over and create their own fiefdoms in like small roads and clusters of neighborhoods. So it's ultimately about resolving the currency crisis. A lot of government workers, a lot of Hamas fighters for 3 months during the beginning of the year did not receive salaries. Then we had the ceasefire. We had a period of time where there wasn't intense fighting, and Israel let a lot of trucks in without vetting them. And they were hijacked immediately by Hamas. And the reason they do it is not to steal the food because, the food is abundant for everybody at this point. So that's not necessarily the problem. They're stockpiling on it, and they have been doing it for years. The main goal is to either physically control the trucks or to force the companies that are moving the trucks in to pay them a premium in order to not attack them. So they either force the companies to pay a premium or they use violence to coerce them into doing so. Then they get moved into warehouses that are controlled by Hamas. And then from there, they sell it at a higher price to the merchants. And the merchants then, because of course they paid a lot of money to buy the products, they also raise the prices for the civilians that want to buy it from them. So then everybody suffers except for the Hamas members that receive their salary.
Yeah.
And it's all about survival for them. They don't care about the other people in the strip that are suffering alongside them. And then their ire, at least for when the international community is concerned, remains squarely focused on Israel. And they're just missing the forest for the trees in so many of these cases, as you know.
Yeah. And, my final point I wanted to bring up about this report was its claims that Israel is purposefully displacing Gazans and forcing them to move. Now, they use examples of where Israel warned Gazans to leave and leave the area to somewhere else because it was conducting a military situation there. So, I mean, Israel, the IDF, is the only army in the world its to warn its enemy that it's coming. And according to the report, I guess that's genocide or that's purposeful displacement. That's against in international law. I mean, the IDF isn't forcing you to leave. All it's telling you is that, look, if you don't leave, your house is going to get bombed because your house has a bomb in it. So it doesn't make sense. I mean, these claims of genocide just don't add up. And at the end of the day, this report is based off A, individual accounts from terrorists that voted in Hamas, B, reports from agencies that are associated with Hamas, like UNRWA, or what is it, the Palestinian Organization for Children, which has been proven to
Oh yeah,
have,
yeah.
connections to the PLFP, or all of these
PFL.
other organizations. Not only that, but the report itself is written by people who have direct connections to these people. The director of the entire committee is actually someone who, from the very beginning of her career in the UN, started attacking Israel. She called Israel an apartheid state from the very beginning. She has been criticizing Israel since 2014. I mean, we have these people who we are expected to trust for no apparent reason. And these people who are basically Hamas players, anti Semites, and bigots are the ones accusing Israel of genocide, and we're supposed to believe that? I mean, of course they are. So, this entire situation is ridiculous. And the scary thing is, people don't understand, both on the right and the left, how ridiculous this is, and how ingrained in society this idea that Israel and Jews are evil. And that is what's really concerning about this report. So, Ofer, I'm sure you're going to read this report for yourself, and I'm sure I'm going to write many more articles about it because it's just truly interesting. But now to move on to our final topic. We talked a lot about Charlie Kirk's assassination on this show.
Yeah.
We were both very personally affected by it. But Ofer, there has been a lot of updates pertaining to the shooter and the killer. So, Ofer, why don't you give me a rundown of what the updates were and what are your thoughts on it?
Sure. So we've received a lot of corroboration and additional reports from the FBI, from the governor of Utah. So the most interesting piece of information to come out since we've last uploaded a video is the transcript of text messages after the assassination between Tyler Robinson, the assassin, and his transgender partner, Lance Twiggs. So he runs through there and just confirms the entire story, and he goes through how he changed clothing, the way in which he moved and maneuvered with the Mauser sniper, what he did afterwards, how he left it within the towel, and how his dad was hardcore MAGA. Those were a couple of the references over there. He said he'd been planning it for a bit more than a week,
Mm-hmm.
and that he just didn't like the hateful nature of Charlie Kirk without going into more detail about it. And the partner in the text messages in the conversation appeared as if they weren't aware of the situation. That's the way it looked based on the text messages. But they looked very unnatural. I have to
Yeah.
say, like, we can talk about it, but it just seemed very unnatural. So that was one piece of information that came out. Moreover, we received, based on reporting from Glenn Klippenstein, the Discord posts made by Tyler Robinson, where it showed that he was an avid gamer, that he was in this community with 20 other people. It appeared as if they were shocked by his admission and confession to it based on the images released and the screenshots. He also appeared not to mention Trump or Biden or
Mhm.
many political issues at all during his conversations on Discord, although it's only one Discord channel. There are many, so he may have been talking about it elsewhere. And so it shows how deeply ingrained he was in online culture. It explains why he wrote what he did write on the bullet casings, but it's not a complete picture yet. We still are waiting for a full social profile on this individual. I think it's pretty clear by now, based on the sort of reports from his family, that he was becoming more radicalized, pushing leftwards from classmates, from some friends, from family members, like I said. And then also the fact that the FBI is now investigating those 20 other people in the Discord server to see if they're informants or if they will end up cooperating or if they were complicit with the murder. That all has to be investigated, obviously. But that means that it's still ongoing, and we'll have to see whether it was only Robinson and whether he was radicalized, perhaps in relation to his partner, or whether it was a larger conspiracy with those other individuals that he was conversing with. So, yeah, I just wonder about your thoughts about the text messages and about the
Yeah.
investigation at this point in time.
Yeah, definitely. So something you didn't mention, so I'll just add it. We
Yeah,
have learned that the initial person who got arrested apparently yelled or admitted to yelling something to distract the crowd and distract the crowd from the actual shooter. So he purposefully got arrested for that. And,
yeah,
that just, it poses another question of whether he was involved. According to what we know now, he was not involved. He did not conspire with the shooter, but we never know. And yeah, so and actually, he was arrested for another reason too, because the police found explicit photos on his phone of children. So it was good we got him off the street.
very
So,
weird.
sorry.
Very weird.
Yeah, exactly. And it shocked me when I actually learned that. But to talk about the text messages, look, I believe that Tyler Robinson was the actual shooter. I never didn't think so. However, after reading those text messages, maybe like they were ChatGPT. Come on, like I mean, they were not normal conversation. I don't know how people talk to their friends, but at least I will never talk like that. That seemed very unnatural. It literally seemed like it was written through Google Translate by someone else. I don't know, but like these text messages really are shocking because it shows a very formal relationship between these people, which I just can't believe. I don't believe that actually happened. So, in my opinion, this could be a cover up. They could be either covering up for someone else, maybe someone else hired Tyler to do it, or maybe what happened was that the other person in the picture in the relationship was actually aware of Tyler's situation and they did this to protect him. So, one or the other, it's possible, but I'm sure the FBI will get a hold of it. Also, there's a lot of investigations on whether any other groups, as you mentioned, had any involvement. And so far, we don't know many details about what groups are being investigated, but definitely, his Discord servers, his gamer friends, they need to be investigated, and that's a concern. So overall, this situation is devastating. I mean, Charlie Kirk was a hero. He died a hero for our country, and he will always be remembered as a hero for our country. But we also see that there's a lot of pushback on that point. We see people celebrating the death of him. So, what are your reaction to that?
Yeah, I've seen everything from literal celebration, people cheering and like screaming in joy. I've seen people that have immediately started talking about his previous comments, trying to portray him as this evil, irredeemable, racist, and fascist. So everything they've been calling him before, but now upping the ante even more to slander a dead man who can't defend himself. I've seen people make jokes about it, and that's already a gray area. I'm not concerned about that as much. There's the database, which is called Charlie's Murderers, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and it just goes through 60,000 people. The database started at 20K, now it's at 60K. People with their public profiles, they're not even scared to hide behind like an anonymous account. They're using their actual faces on LinkedIn and on Facebook, and they're cheering his death and saying that it was justified. And those are the people that have to be rooted out of society, not because of their political views, but because they reject the concept of civil dialogue, any sort of discussion with the other side completely. And that's actually extremely dangerous to anybody that doesn't agree with them, because it seems as if they are willing to give a carte blanche for anybody to commit political violence against somebody that disagrees with them on these issues, as evidenced by their support for the murderer. And the most high profile case, I suppose, would be the president, or the incoming president of the Oxford Student Union,
Hmm.
this Nigerian dude who, he debated him in person. Like, he literally shook Charlie's hand. So they were able to converse. And if I ever met somebody in person, no matter how much I disagreed with them, I would never think about going immediately afterwards and celebrating it, saying, let's go, and smiling about
Yeah.
it, celebrating with friends. That is so disgusting. And it's a complete lack of humanity. And he's still not been removed from his upcoming position. That shows the complete moral decay within these institutions, higher education in the UK and elsewhere. I am aghast by it, and there has to be social consequences, not legal, like Pam Body was alluding to, but like social consequences, definitely.
Yeah, and this is very different from, the left's canceling culture because this is celebrating death. If anyone celebrated George Floyd death, I would say the same thing. I would say that celebrating the death of anyone, no matter who they are, unless they are a murderer who got the death penalty, is not okay. And it goes for, George Floyd, it goes for, I don't know, Malcolm X, and it will go for Charlie Kirk. And that's if I didn't agree with Charlie Kirk or if I didn't even meet him. But Charlie Kirk is different because he, no matter what you think of him, dedicated his life to civil discourse and teaching others. He purposefully spoke and gave a platform to the people that he disagreed with. There's no one else that does that. No other, you can't compare Charlie to anyone like that did the same as him, and that's why I respect him so much, and why I'm just shocked by the reaction on the left of his death. People should be mourning his death, let alone to celebrate it. It's shocking, and severe consequences should be put into place.
Yeah.
Personally, if my friend were to celebrate the death of someone like Charlie Kirk, I would be devastated and I would be very surprised. So, yeah, I mean, it's a shocking situation, but unfortunately, his death is very unfortunate. But as we repeatedly said, we will carry on Charlie Kirk's legacy, and we will make sure that his name never dies in vain. So, thank you guys so much for joining the Patriot Perspective. This was a wonderful episode. We're excited to see you back soon. And Ofer, just back to you.
Thank you guys so much. Next week's going to be very exciting. A lot of content coming out. So stay tuned. And goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.